Welcome to the 700 Club. Let's go over to the CBN newsroom for today's top stories.
Thanks, Gordon. As Congress battles over COVID relief checks, the virus continues to take lives, including Louisiana's newest Republican member of the House of Representatives. Luke Letlow was just days away from being sworn in. As Heather Sells reports, he's one of thousands falling victim to the latest surge.
41-year-old Congressman-elect Luke Letlow died Tuesday night in the intensive care unit of a Shreveport hospital. Across the nation, COVID hospitalizations have hit a record 127,000. And health officials in Colorado have discovered the first known U.S. case of the new variant of the coronavirus, initially found in the U.K. It is considered even more contagious, although not more deadly. There's also concern about the pace of the vaccination campaign. So far, only 2.1 million vaccine doses have been administered, although the Trump administration promised 20 million by year's end.
The effort to distribute and administer the vaccine is not progressing as it should.
On Tuesday, President-elect Joe Biden criticized the distribution, but the administration says there's a lag in reporting and that the federal government can only do so much.
The federal government doesn't invade Texas or Montana and provide shots to people. We support the state and locals in doing that.
In Washington, lawmakers are battling over COVID relief. The big sticking point, stimulus checks. President Trump is pushing to increase them from 600 to 2,000. The House has approved it, and more GOP senators are on board, including David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler, both in Georgia's runoff elections next week.
Absolutely. We need to get relief to Americans now, and I will support that.
But on Tuesday, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell blocked a move to bring the increase up for a vote. The administration says those $600 checks start going out today, and people should look for them the first week of January. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Updating you now on the suspect in the Christmas Day bombing in Nashville. Anthony Quinn Warner's girlfriend reportedly warned the Nashville police back in August 2019 that he was making bombs in his RV. That's according to the Nashville Tennessean newspaper. After her report, police visited Warner's home, but he did not answer and they did not search the premises. The department passed the information to the FBI, which ran a check and said it had no information on Warner. The world has seen a lot of suffering in 2020. The late evangelist Billy Graham took on the issue of suffering in a 1981 book. As Paul Strand reports, his son Franklin thinks this is the perfect time to reissue his father's book.
Billy Graham's Who's in Charge of a World That Suffers tackles tough questions about troubles and woes. His son Franklin Graham does a new introduction for this just reissued book. He writes, "Suffering is no surprise to the Lord. Jesus warned that we would face uncertainty, persecution, and trouble of every kind. He himself suffered for us."
God, no question, is in charge. But we also know that the world in which we live is a fallen world. And the God of this age is Satan. And we know that he controls so much of what is going on in the world, the bad things that are going on.
There's so much darkness rising these days. Graham suspects we're beginning to enter the time of the book of Revelation, the end of days.
This is, I think, an exciting time. It's not something we should be afraid of. But we need to know that God is still in charge and that he writes the last pages of history. It's not going to be the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, or the United Nations. The Lord Jesus Christ comes back and establishes his kingdom. And for those that have put their faith and trust in him, we know that we will be, our soul will be secure in his hands.
And there will be for eternity. But that certainly doesn't mean Christians are immune from suffering while here on earth.
We're not exempt. We don't live in some kind of bubble. And we are going to go through suffering. And I think this book deals with that. Till Armageddon was the original title. But we all face these Armageddons in our life as we go through life, these storms of life. Jesus himself was in a storm. He was with his disciples out on the Sea of Galilee. And a storm came up suddenly without warning, and it was swamping the boat, sinking.
So his disciples woke Jesus, who commanded the storm be still.
course, the wind and the waves is going to obey his voice because he created it. And when we put our faith and trust in him, if we're in his boat, we don't have to worry because his boat doesn't sink. And we just need to make sure we're in his boat.
You can find out how to be sure in the pages of Billy Graham's Who's in Charge of a World That Suffers. In his introduction to the book, Franklin writes, "There is no need to worry, there is no need to wrestle, and there is no need to wonder who is in charge of a world that is suffering. Look to Jesus Christ and live." Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
In other news, Louisville police are moving to fire 2 police officers involved in the Breonna Taylor raid. Taylor died when police returned fire after her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, shot an officer when they burst into her home. Police say they identified themselves, but Walker and other witnesses say that's not true. The interim chief is accusing the detective who prepared the warrant of lying on the application. The department is also seeking to terminate the detective who the FBI says fired the fatal shot. 20,000 innocent people are behind bars in America, and the man you're about to meet was one of them. As Charlene Aaron tells us, he spent a quarter of a century in prison, wrongly convicted of murder.
Jonathan Fleming spent nearly 25 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. Thanks to attorneys taking a closer look at his case, Fleming was released and now wants to help others who have also been wrongfully convicted. In 1989, jurors convicted Fleming of second-degree murder in the death of a New York drug dealer. Fleming, who also sold drugs and knew the man, says he had a solid alibi.
I happened to be in Florida with my family at the time when my friend was killed. I took my son, my oldest son, to Orlando, Florida for his birthday, for his 9th birthday.
Prosecutors argued Fleming could have returned to Brooklyn to commit the crime. They also produced a witness who testified seeing Fleming pull the trigger.
She said that she actually seen me do this murder. And I know for a fact, I was saying to myself that it's not true because I wasn't even in New York on that day.
Fleming, however, was found guilty and spent the next 24 years of his life behind bars.
Prison was really rough. I was in prison for something I didn't do. So I did start getting in a lot of trouble, but I was very angry.
And that anger consumed him until an experience at a church service.
And I don't remember what the word that day was, but I found myself standing up and I walked forward. And I turned my life over to God.
A spiritual transformation that answered longtime prayers for his ex-wife.
And I just listened to him go on and on and on about what the pastor had preached and how he's found himself getting up and going towards the altar. And yeah, this just feels so good. And I don't know what I'm feeling, but I'm excited, Trish. I'm excited. And I was like, God is just awesome.
Fleming spent years trying to prove his innocence, and a break finally came when Brooklyn's Conviction Review Unit took his case. Attorneys found evidence proving Fleming could not have been in New York at the time of the murder, information authorities never turned over to his defense team.
We were able to discover a document, a receipt, which had been taken from Mr. Fleming at the time of his arrest. That, of course, meant that the eyewitness testimony that had been produced in that case to the effect of an eyewitness saying that they saw Mr. Fleming commit the shooting homicide was false.
These investigative teams, also known as integrity review units, are spreading across the country. And in 2018 alone, statistics show they helped free 58 wrongfully convicted people.
There were probably less than 20 such units around the country. Since that time and the success that we had initially and continue to have with regard to our conviction review unit, that number has more than doubled to the point where we have more than 40 such units around the country.
A new team in Georgia helped free Darrell Hall, sentenced to life for possessing 2 grams of cocaine in 1991. Media mogul Tyler Perry recently gave him a job at his Atlanta studios.
He said he was having trouble getting a job. I'm like, well, look around. We got lots of room around here. Come on, let's go to work. It just shows you the level of how if you're poor, black, and disenfranchised, how you don't even have a chance at justice in most cases.
In Fleming's case, justice arrived on April 8th, 2014.
It was like my life starting all over again. I was so happy, and the judge said, your case is dismissed. And the first thing I did, I turned around and I went right to my mother.
While Fleming is grateful for the work of attorneys and investigators, he says the real credit goes to God.
And he released me and delivered me when he felt that I was ready. But it wasn't until I turned my life over to him that things started happening.
That includes letting go of anger towards those responsible for robbing him of nearly 25 years of his life.
I was able to forgive because he forgave me for the things that I've done.
Meanwhile, the state of New York awarded Fleming $6 million for his wrongful incarceration, something he hopes to use to help others through the Jonathan Fleming Foundation.
When I came home, I had no housing. I had to stay with my cousin for the first 8 months. When I came home, I didn't have nothing. I want to help people when they come home, try to provide them with homes, places to stay, places that they could go to when they are released, because a lot of time we are just pushed out with nowhere to go.
Charlene Aaron, CBN News, Raleigh, North Carolina.